In the summer of 2003, I decided to take a solo camping trip to Pine Ridge Campground, nestled deep within the dense forests of Washington state. I had always loved the outdoors and cherished the solitude and peace that came with being surrounded by nature. Little did I know that this trip would turn into a terrifying experience that I would never forget. Pine Ridge was a beautiful and relatively isolated campground, known mostly to local hikers and campers. The area was dense with towering pine trees, and a crystal-clear stream ran through the campsite, making it an ideal spot for fishing and relaxation. The nearest town, Millwood, was about a 30-minute drive away, adding to the sense of seclusion. I arrived on a Thursday afternoon, eager to set up camp and immerse myself in nature. After pitching my tent and arranging my gear, I spent the rest of the day exploring the area and taking in the serene surroundings. The weather was perfect, warm, but not too hot, with a gentle breeze rustling the leaves. As the sun began to set, I built a small campfire and cooked a simple meal. The sounds of the forest at dusk were soothing, and I felt a sense of contentment and peace. I had a good book with me and planned to spend the evening reading by the fire before turning in for the night. At some point, nature called, and I needed to find a suitable spot away from my campsite to relieve myself. With my flashlight in hand, I ventured into the woods, walking a good distance from my tent to ensure privacy. The forest was darker than I expected, and the sounds of nocturnal creatures added an eerie atmosphere to my surroundings. After finishing up, I started making my way back to the campsite. As I approached, I noticed something strange. There were two figures standing near my tent. My heart skipped a beat. At first I thought it might be fellow campers, but as I got closer I realized they were strangers. The two men looked rough and unkempt, with scruffy beards and dirty clothes. They appeared to be in their late 30s or early 40s. One of them held a flashlight, while the other rummaged through my belongings. A wave of panic washed over me as I crouched behind a tree, trying to decide what to do. "Did you find anything?" the man with the flashlight asked. "Not much," the other replied, his voice gruff. "Just some camping gear and food." "Keep looking," the first man said. "There might be something valuable here." I knew I had to act quickly. I didn't have my phone with me, and the nearest help was miles away. My mind raced as I considered my options. Running back to the campsite seemed too risky. I didn't want to confront these men alone and unarmed. Suddenly, an idea struck me. I picked up a large stick from the ground and threw it into the woods, creating a loud rustling noise. The men immediately turned their heads in the direction of the sound. "What was that?" the rummaging man asked, sounding alarmed. "Probably just an animal," the other replied, but he sounded uncertain. I took advantage of their distraction and quietly circled around to the other side of the campsite. I needed to get to my car, which was parked a short distance away, without them noticing. Moving as silently as I could, I crept through the underbrush, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the edge of the campsite, I heard one of the men speak again. "We should get out of here. This place is giving me the creeps." "Yeah," the other agreed. "Let's go." I watched as they gathered their things and started walking towards the path that led back to the main road. I waited until they were out of sight before making a break for my car. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the keys, finally managing to unlock the door and jump inside. I drove to the nearest town, my mind racing with thoughts of what could have happened if those men had caught me. When I reached Millwood, I found the local sheriff's office and reported the incident. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Tom, listened attentively as I recounted my story. "You did the right thing by getting out of there," he said. "We've had reports of suspicious activity around Pine Ridge before, but we've never been able to catch anyone. I'll send a deputy out to check the area." Feeling shaken, but grateful to be safe, I found a motel in town and booked a room for the night. As I lay in the bed, the events of the evening replayed in my mind. The serene beauty of Pine Ridge had been shattered by the intrusion of those men, and the sense of peace I had felt earlier was replaced by unease. The next morning, I returned to the campsite with Deputy Harris, a young and friendly officer who assured me they would do everything they could to find the intruders. We found my campsite mostly undisturbed, except for a few items the men had left behind, a dirty rag and an empty beer can. "Looks like they were just looking for easy targets," Deputy Harris said, shaking his head. "It's a good thing you didn't confront them. You never know what people like that are capable of." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and lingering fear. I packed up my remaining gear and thanked the deputy for his help. As I drove away from Pine Ridge, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped a dangerous situation. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about the incident. I'd always loved camping and the sense of freedom it brought, but this experience had shaken my confidence. I realized that while the wilderness offered beauty and tranquility, it also held unseen dangers. I shared my story with friends and family, who were all relieved that I was safe. Some of them were surprised that something like this could happen in such a peaceful place, while others reminded me to always be cautious and prepared when venturing into remote areas. Over time, I regained my love for the outdoors, but I approached it with a newfound sense of vigilance. I made sure to always camp in well-populated areas and to inform someone of my plans before heading out. The experience at Pine Ridge had taught me a valuable lesson about the unpredictability of human nature and the importance of staying alert. Looking back, I am grateful for the instincts that guided me that night and the luck that allowed me to escape unharmed. The memory of those two strange men at my campsite serves as a reminder to always trust my gut and to never underestimate the potential dangers, even in the most beautiful and seemingly safe places. If you ever find yourself camping in a remote area, remember my story. Be prepared, stay alert, and always trust your instincts. The wilderness is a wonderful place to explore, but it's important to respect its potential dangers and to be ready for anything. It was the summer of 1991, a year that stands out vividly in my memory. My father, George, and I had planned a solo camping trip to Devil's Lake, a remote spot in the forests of Oregon. I was 15, excited to spend some quality time with my dad in the great outdoors. Little did I know, this trip would be far from the bonding experience I had imagined. Devil's Lake was known for its serene beauty, crystal clear waters, and lush greenery. However, it also had a reputation for strange occurrences and eerie tales told by locals. My father, being the adventurous spirit he was, dismissed these stories as nothing more than local folklore. "Just tall tales to scare kids," he would say with a laugh. We arrived at the campsite on a warm Friday morning. The air was fresh with the scent of pine, and the sounds of birds chirping filled the air. We set up our tent near the lake, a perfect spot with a stunning view of the water. As we unpacked, my dad and I talked about all the fun things we would do, fishing, hiking, and maybe even some late-night storytelling by the campfire. After setting up camp, we spent the day exploring the area. We hiked through the forest, marveling at the towering trees and the occasional sighting of wildlife. The lake was inviting, and we spent the afternoon fishing, catching a few small fish that we planned to cook for dinner. As the sun began to set, we returned to our campsite and started a fire. Dinner was simple but delicious. We roasted the fish over the fire, along with some potatoes and corn. As we ate, my dad began to tell me stories about his own childhood camping trips with his father. It was a perfect evening, filled with laughter and the warmth of the fire. As darkness fell, the forest around us grew quiet. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. We decided to turn in early, tired from the day's activities. I crawled into my sleeping bag, feeling a sense of peace and contentment. Sometime in the middle of the night, I was awakened by a strange noise. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling through the trees, but then I heard it again, a low guttural growl. I sat up, my heart started pounding in my chest. My dad was already awake, peering out of the tent with a flashlight. "Did you hear that?" I whispered with my trembling voice. "Yeah," he replied. His face was serious. "Stay here. I'm going to check it out." Before I could protest, he unzipped the tent and stepped outside. I watched as the beam of his flashlight swept across the campsite. The growling continued, closer now, and I could see the tension in my dad's posture. Suddenly, there was a loud crash, followed by the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. My dad stumbled back into the tent, his face looked pale. "We need to stay inside," he said. His voice became shaky. "Whatever it is, it's big." We sat in the tent, listening to the sounds outside. The growling and crashing continued for what felt like hours. I clutched my sleeping bag, too scared to move. My dad kept the flashlight on, pointing it towards the entrance of the tent. Eventually, the noises stopped, and an eerie silence fell over the campsite. We stayed awake for the rest of the night, too afraid to sleep. When the first light of dawn broke through the trees, we cautiously stepped outside. The campsite was a mess. Our cooler had been knocked over, and the food we had brought was scattered everywhere. Deep claw marks were gouged into the ground, leading away from the tent and into the forest. My dad and I quickly packed up our gear, deciding it was best to leave as soon as possible. As we loaded the car, we noticed something strange on the edge of the campsite. It was a circle of stones arranged in a pattern we didn't recognize. In the center of the circle was a small carved figurine, roughly shaped like an animal. It looked ancient, worn smooth by time. "We didn't see this yesterday, did we?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. "No," my dad replied, his brow furrowed. "We need to go. Now." We drove away from Devil's Lake, the sense of unease lingering in the car. My dad tried to comfort me, saying it was probably just a bear or some other wild animal, but I could tell he was just as shaken as I was. When we got home, we told my mom about our experience. She listened. Her face started growing more concerned as we described the events of the night. She had grown up in Oregon and had heard stories about Devil's Lake, stories of strange creatures and ancient rituals performed by the native tribes who once lived in the area. Curious and seeking answers, my dad did some research at the local library. He found old newspaper articles and historical records about the lake. According to the legends, the lake was considered sacred by the native tribes, a place where spirits dwelled. The circle of stones and the figurine we found matched descriptions of ritual sites used to summon protective spirits or ward off evil. We never went back to Devil's Lake, and my dad became much more cautious about our camping trips after that. We stuck to well-known, populated campgrounds, avoiding remote and secluded areas. The memory of that night stayed with us, a reminder of the unknown dangers that can lurk in the wilderness. As the years passed, my dad and I continued to share our story with friends and family. It became a tale of caution, a reminder to respect the mysteries of nature. The experience brought us closer together, forging a bond through our shared fear and survival. To this day, I still think about that night at Devil's Lake. The growls, the claw marks, the strange circle of stones. It's a mystery that remains unsolved. I can still hear the sound of my dad's voice, steady and reassuring, even in the face of the unknown. And I am grateful for that night, terrifying as it was, for it taught me to always be aware of my surroundings and to trust my instincts. If you ever find yourself camping in the remote forests of Oregon, remember our story. Be cautious, be respectful, and always keep an eye out for the unknown. The wilderness is beautiful, but it can also be home to things we may never fully understand, and sometimes it's better to leave some mysteries unsolved. think back to the summer of 2007, I can't help but shiver. It was the summer that changed how I viewed the wilderness forever. My name is Ethan, and I was 16 years old when my father, John, and I decided to go camping in the secluded area of Blackwood Forest in Pennsylvania. My father loved the outdoors and had passed that love on to me. We were excited about the trip, planning to spend a few days away from the hustle and bustle of city life in Pittsburgh. Blackwood Forest was known for its dense woods and abundant wildlife. The area wasn't frequented by many, which made it perfect for a quiet getaway. We arrived on a bright Friday morning, set up our tent near a small clearing, and prepared for a weekend of hiking, fishing, and bonding. The weather was perfect, clear skies and a light breeze that rustled the leaves in a soothing symphony. The first day went by without incident. We hiked along trails, fished in the nearby stream, and cooked our catch over a campfire. As night fell, we sat around the fire, telling stories and enjoying the calm of the forest. The stars were bright, and the moon cast a gentle glow over the campsite. Everything felt peaceful, and I was looking forward to a good night's sleep under the stars. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up needing to relieve myself. I grabbed my flashlight and quietly slipped out of the tent, not wanting to wake my dad. The forest was dark and eerily silent, with only the occasional rustle of leaves breaking the quiet. I walked a short distance away from the tent, finding a suitable spot to do my business. As I finished and was about to head back, I felt a strange sensation, like I was being watched. I brushed it off as paranoia and started walking back towards the campsite. That's when I saw them. Two glowing eyes in the distance, reflecting the light of my flashlight. They were low to the ground, like an animal's, but they didn't move or blink. I stopped in my tracks. My heart started pounding in my chest. I tried to convince myself it was just a deer or some other forest creature, but something about those eyes felt wrong. They were too steady, too focused. Gathering my courage, I took a step forward, shining the flashlight towards the eyes. They vanished. A chill ran down my spine. I turned quickly, hoping to make it back to the safety of the tent, but as I did, I saw the eyes again, this time closer. They were following me. Panic set in, and I started walking faster, my breaths coming in short, frightened gasps. The eyes kept pace with me, always at the edge of the light, never revealing the creature behind them. I broke into a run, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly. As I sprinted back to the campsite, I burst into the tent, waking my dad with a start. "Ethan, what's wrong?" he asked, alarmed by my frantic entrance. "Dad, there's something out there," I panted, trying to catch my breath. "Something with glowing eyes. It was following me." My dad grabbed his flashlight and a hunting knife he always kept with him for protection. "Stay here," he instructed, stepping outside the tent. I wanted to protest, but fear had left me frozen. I watched as my dad circled the campsite, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. He returned a few minutes later, looking puzzled. "I didn't see anything, Ethan. Are you sure you saw something?" "I swear, Dad, there were eyes out there. They were watching me, following me." He sighed, looking around one last time before coming back into the tent. "We'll keep the fire going and stay alert. It was probably just an animal, but we'll be cautious." We stoked the fire and my dad stayed up for a while, keeping watch. I tried to sleep, but every sound seemed amplified in the darkness. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. The next day, we decided to stay close to the campsite. My dad believed me, but thought it was best to remain cautious. We spent the day fishing and exploring the immediate area, trying to shake off the unease from the night before. As evening approached, we cooked dinner and settled in for another night around the campfire. Night fell, and the forest once again wrapped us in its inky embrace. My dad and I talked quietly, the fire casting flickering shadows on the trees. The events of the previous night felt like a bad dream, but the fear still lingered at the edge of my mind. Just as we were about to turn in for the night, we heard a rustling sound from the bushes nearby. My dad grabbed his flashlight and knife, motioning for me to stay close. The rustling grew louder, and then we saw them, those same glowing eyes, peering at us from the darkness. My dad shone his flashlight directly at the eyes, but they remained steady, unblinking. "Whoever's out there, show yourself," he called out. His voice became firm. There was no response, just the unwavering gaze of those eyes. Then, slowly, they began to move, circling the campsite. My dad and I backed towards the tent, keeping the fire between us and the eyes. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead, my heart pounding in my ears. "Stay calm, Ethan," my dad whispered. "We'll get through this." The eyes continued to circle us, never getting closer, but never retreating. The firelight flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced in the dark. We stood our ground, my dad holding his knife ready, me clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. Hours seemed to pass. The eyes were never leaving us. Eventually they vanished, melting into the darkness of the forest. We stayed up the rest of the night, too afraid to sleep. When dawn finally broke, we quickly packed up our campsite and left, the fear from the night still fresh in our minds. As we drove back to Pittsburgh, my dad tried to rationalize what had happened. It was probably just a curious animal, maybe a coyote or a deer, he said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. We reported the incident to the park rangers, who promised to investigate but seemed skeptical. It was clear they thought we had imagined it or had an encounter with some harmless wildlife. But I knew what I saw. Those eyes were not normal. They were something else, something that didn't belong. Years have passed since that night in Blackwood Forest, but the memory remains vivid. I've gone camping many times since, but always with a sense of caution and a watchful eye on the darkness. The wilderness, beautiful and serene by day, holds secrets that can turn to nightmares by night. If you ever find yourself camping in a remote area, remember my story. Stay alert, keep your fire strong, and be aware of the eyes that might be watching you from the shadows. The forest is a place of mystery, and not all of its inhabitants are friendly.